Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much for braving the awful weather. Unfortunately, some people have got lost, and others have been a little bit inconvenienced by the weather. But we do have quite a number of people watching us via live streaming. So there are many hundreds of us actually taking part this afternoon. My mother has asked me to present her tribute to my father today, and it's my great privilege to be able to do that for her. And this memorial address will include her words, a few of mine, and even some of my father's. When a person dies, messages of condolence generally contain platitudes regarding the exemplary character of the deceased. But in the case of Jim Goodacre, husband, father, grandfather, and great-grandfather, these are not just cliches, but undeniable fact. He was loving and kind, with a keen sense of humor, adored by his wife of 70 years, Irene, generally known as Buns, as well as his 4 children, Peter, Merrill, Julia, and Elizabeth, as well as his grandchildren and great-grandchildren, of whom he was extremely proud and loved dearly. Jim and my mother Irene had known each other for 77 years and celebrated their 70th wedding anniversary last year. When asked how the marriage had lasted so long, my father would laugh and say, "You have to like the person you're married to." James George Goodacre was born in June 1933 in Shepherd's Bush, London, which in those days was far from being the gentrified suburb it is now. For such a giant in the field of education, Jim Goodacre's own education had a rocky start. At the age of only 6, World War II began. The British government assumed that Britain's larger cities and military installations would be targeted by German bombers. And in 1939, within a couple of days of war being declared, my father, his mother, and his 2 sisters were evacuated to Somerset, where they were placed with an elderly lady. The anticipated blitzkrieg didn't happen until 1939, and in about a month they returned to a changed London of sandbags, gas masks, ration books, and nightly blackouts. Now, these were done on purpose and had nothing to do with ESCOM. In 1940, the expected German blitz materialized, and once again, the government organized a second evacuation of tens of thousands of mainly working-class children from London. Little 7-year-old Jim Goodacre and his 5-year-old sister Lil were among them. Just think about that. Neither they nor their parents knew where they would be going or when they would be returning. Now, can you imagine how traumatic that separation must have been for the parents and the children? They were placed with 3 different families over a 2-year period, none of which was particularly welcoming to these 2 London urchins. At night, the red glow of London burning was visible on the horizon, where they knew their parents and younger sister were still living. In 1942, Dad and Lil were able to return to London after the few in their Spitfires and Hurricanes had done their job. The Blitz was over, but London was still a target for bombing raids until 1943. During his evacuation, Dad had attended several different schools of varying quality, which is not an ideal way to get a good education. In 1944, at the age of 11, he sat for his 11+ exam, which would determine whether he would go to a grammar school for an academic education, which in theory would qualify him for university entrance, or receive an elementary education and leave school at 14 or 15 to join the ranks of skilled or semi-skilled workers. This exam was duly written in March of 1944, and in June of that year, Hitler launched the first of the 2,500 V-2 rockets that would land on London. Once again, little Jim Goodacre and his sister Lil were evacuated, this time to a small village close to Land's End, and to a woman who my father described as the most unpleasant and mean-spirited woman he had ever encountered. She held this honor until he met his future mother-in-law a few years later. He and his sister endured 7 months of the unpleasant Mrs. Farley. The name even sounds like a villain out of a Dickensian novel. But finding out that he had passed the dreaded 11+ exam and would be studying at Penzance County Grammar School for Boys was a change to his routine, which he thoroughly enjoyed. January 1945 saw a welcome return to London after my grandmother had paid her children a visit at the flea-ridden home of the awful Mrs. Farley and been appalled by the living conditions. My father summed up his childhood as follows: The war years encompassed the majority of my childhood. I was 6 when it began and 12 when it ended. During that time, I'd attended 6 different junior schools, admittedly spending only a very short time in 2 of them, and 2 grammar schools. But by any standard, 8 schools in 6 years was not exactly the norm. I'd spent many nights sleeping in air raid shelters and on the platform of a tube station. Most significantly, for almost 3 years, Lil and I were living away from home with strangers that had taken us in only because they had no choice in the matter. In this, I was no different from other children at the time, and many had had a much harder time. Yet because we'd never known anything different, we all accepted that this was the way things were. We didn't think of ourselves as wartime children. We were just kids and did what kids always do. We let the adults do the worrying, and by and large, that's what they did. Now compare that to some 12-year-olds today who throw a tantrum because they don't have the latest iPhone. Dad completed his grammar school education at Sloane Grammar School in Chelsea, where he mixed with a melting pot of boys from different backgrounds, from working class to wealthy upper middle class. He was struck by the fact that the boys from a higher social status spoke very differently, so he worked hard to improve his London working class accent. Just imagine for a moment Principal Goodacre exclaiming, "No, Mum, I've never done it and I ain't going to do it. It don't matter." Fortunately, his efforts were successful, although his sisters then labelled him a snob. In July 1951, Jim Goodacre became eligible for compulsory military service and became RAF radio specialist Goodacre JG, spending the next 3 years trying to repair radio transmitters with varying degrees of success. He'd first met my mother briefly in 1947 when she happened to walk past him and a friend playing football. He famously kicked the ball towards her, not at her, so that she would notice him, and he went to retrieve it. After my mother made an unexpected appearance at the local church, they both became members of the church youth club and attended dances where they could waltz the night away. This, of course, being long before the rock and roll era. The pair were engaged in 1952 during my dad's military service, and it was just before being demobbed from the RAF in 1954 that my dad was informed that his little sister Pat was to perform at a school concert, and it would be nice if everyone could attend. The enthusiasm and enjoyment of the children and the involvement of the teachers struck a chord with my dad, and he realized at that life-defining moment that this was exactly the kind of career he wanted. 2 years at Teachers Training College would mean 2 years without income, and my mother, supportive as ever, committed to being the breadwinner of the family while my father studied. My mother was working in the education department of the London County Council at the time, so was able to find details of suitable training colleges in London as well as student grants. He was eventually called for an interview at the College of St. Mark and St. John in Chelsea, and after an interview which he felt went badly, he was offered a place due to sharing a birthday with the interviewer. Another example of a happy coincidence helping to shape Dad's future. The college would put on annual productions of Gilbert and Sullivan operettas, and it was there that my father developed a lifelong love of Gilbert and Sullivan. It was played a lot at home while I was growing up, and by the age of 13, I was singing along to the albums. Taylor Swift it wasn't. I was listening to the Gilbert and Sullivan overtures that we were playing earlier, and it struck me how much Dad would have loved hearing those. My parents married on September the 4th, 1954 at St. Anne's Church in Highgate, with a budget of £20 for the reception and a similar amount for the honeymoon. My father was 21, my mother 20, and they were inseparable for 70 years. My father passed his final exams in June of 1956 and held various positions at schools in Bracknell and Hemel Hempstead until he and his young family left the UK for sunny South Africa at the end of 1965. He became part of the teaching staff at Grove Primary School in Claremont in 1966 and was soon working on improving on the compartmentalized and grammar-based method of teaching English, followed by almost all the teachers. He introduced an integrated whole language approach centered on themes in which all the aspects of the language were incorporated. He placed great emphasis on writing in different styles, on developing comprehension skills, and on reading the high-quality children's literature that was becoming increasingly available. I'm happy to say that he used his children as guinea pigs for many of the books that were placed on that reading list. He also pioneered the initial teaching alphabet that was used at Grove Primary until he left to join Weinberg Junior as vice principal. However, my parents still remain good friends up to now with ex-colleagues Andy and Anne Henderson. Shortly before leaving Grove Primary, my father met my Westerford High School English teacher, Frank Rumble, who was the author of the high school English textbooks Comprehensive English Practice. He asked my father if he would be interested in writing a volume for Standard 5, now grade 7, and the offer was quickly accepted. The book was successful, and publishers Maskew Miller approached my father to continue the series at primary school level. Comprehensive English Practice 1 to 5 was published in 1975 and became the best-selling primary school English first language series in the Cape and beyond. It had 3 reprints and 25 impressions before being rewritten and updated as a new edition in the mid-90s. As of 2017, it had gone through another 15 impressions. My father wrote around 30 books, including textbooks for English as first and second language, anthologies, class readers, and teachers' manuals, an incredible achievement. I'm not going to go into too much detail about my father's time at Weinberg Junior School, as that'll be covered by Tony Stewart later. But I can tell you that my father was seen by the Cape Education Department as a bit of a troublemaker, being prepared to speak his mind and be publicly critical of the department's policies. Now, once a school reached a total enrollment of 601, the school qualified for the addition of a deputy principal. So once this milestone was reached at Weinberg Boys, he was promoted to the position of acting deputy principal, which he held for 2 years. But the position needed to be advertised, and despite having the backing of the principal and the school governing body, his name was not shortlisted. When questioned about this by the Weinberg governors, the education department came up with some ridiculous excuses which ranged from his qualifications to his nationality. Eventually, he received the news that he would not be considered for the position, and he resigned on the spot. Bear in mind that at this point, he had no alternative options on the table. It was a real leap of faith, but he resigned on principle, and that was very much the kind of man that he was. He wasn't finished with Weinberg Boys, though, and in 2016, he was proud to be made an honorary member of the Old Boys Union for his services to the school and for writing the lyrics to the school song which you heard earlier. Weinberg's loss would be Herzlia's gain, and once again Providence stepped in with a call from Stan Lipschitz and an offer of the position of deputy principal at Herzlia Constantia from January 1979. He worked at Herzlia for 19 years, becoming school principal in 1984, and thereby achieving his ambition of heading his own school 18 years after leaving England. He also became the first non-Jewish head of a Jewish school. Those were 19 extremely happy years. He had marvelous colleagues that he respected and admired and was always hugely grateful for their continued friendships. Shirley Kamner will be talking about the Herzlia years later, and my mother wanted me to thank her for her help with the Facebook entries. Jim Goodacre was a huge talent. He created textbooks, scripted plays, influenced and inspired tens of thousands of children, researched and wrote a magnum opus containing centuries of our family history, and also worked as a researcher for an international agency well into his 80s. But there was one achievement that he always held particularly close to his heart. The day he scored a gross 78 at Mowbray Golf Club off a 15 handicap. He would often delight in describing the round to me hole by hole, still bursting with pride. I was fortunate to be able to play regularly with him in the 1980s and have very fond memories of those games. I have to admit that he was probably a better golfer than I. Definitely a better golfer than I. He had 2 huge rivals. Firstly, his brother-in-law and best friend, Ron. You've never seen 2 such competitive adversaries. Their Scrabble games were legendary, with neither prepared to give an inch. They also visited every course they could find during my dad's visits to the UK, including St Andrews. And then there was Peter Jager, my old boss at Yardley Cosmetics, who was an exceptional old-school gentleman. We used to have a regular 4-ball, which included the company CEO. And then Peter and my father retired around the same time, and they happily golfed together a couple of times a week for many years. My mother has asked me to thank some people on her behalf who have been a great help to her. She said, I'd like to thank my daughters, Meryl and Elizabeth in England, for the lovely memorial program which they designed and includes a heartfelt message from them to their father. I'd also like to thank my daughter Julia and her husband Peter, my son Peter, and my grandchildren and their partners for all their help and support during this sad time. I'm truly blessed. To conclude, I also want to thank Chris Merrington for all the arrangements he's made at Weinberg Boys. Jim would have loved this setting. Thank you, too, to all who have sent messages of condolence and have helped me through this sad time. Jim always used to claim that he hated people making a fuss, but I think he would have actually loved all the attention and also greatly appreciated the generous tributes. We've received a message from my father's surviving sisters that I'd like to read now. Our dear brother Jim. Jim never liked having 3 younger sisters when we were all growing up in London. He preferred to be with his best friend Mike, an only child with not a sister in sight. As we grew older, we all became very close, Mike included. We were so proud of everything Jim achieved in his life, which he did through sheer hard work and dedication. Irene, who was the love of his life and supported him every step of the way. It was always lovely to see them when they came to England, but very sad when they returned to Cape Town. Jim was very competitive with his brothers-in-law when in England. He was always out to beat them in golf, fishing, and Scrabble. He didn't always win, but most importantly, they always had a good laugh. We will miss him terribly, and our hearts go out to Irene and all the family. They've also sent a poem. Those we love remain with us, for love itself lives on, and cherished memories never fade because a loved one's gone. Those we love can never be more than a thought apart, for as long as there's a memory, they'll live on in the heart. We will remember you always, Jim, from your loving sisters, Lynn and Jo. My mother also received a very moving tribute from my father's first boss at Herzlia, Mike Pincus, all the way from Mexico, a man for whom my father had the greatest admiration and respect. I know that meant a great deal to my mother and the rest of the family. So thank you very much for that, Mike. And I assume you're watching online, so thank you. And thank you all very much today for braving the weather and being here. And Shirley will now say a few words on behalf of Jim's Herzlia family.
Good afternoon to all who are present here at Jim Goodacre's memorial, as well as those who may be watching from further afield. I was a member of staff at Herzlia Constantia Primary School when Jim was there, initially as a teacher and later as a deputy when he was principal. I was asked by the Goodacre family to be one of the speakers here today to pay tribute to him. And I worked with him for so many years, and it's a great privilege to be given this honor. Thank you. I'm also aware that all of you, in one way or another, have been very fortunate to have had the experience of knowing him firsthand yourselves. As Peter has said, Jim was at the Grove and then Weinberg Boys before he came to Herzlia Constantia, and he was appointed principal there in 1984. Now, you have to understand that for any non-Jewish person who comes on staff at a Jewish day school, it can indeed be a very strange initial encounter, especially if their previous experience has been in state schools. Not only is there the general curriculum, but there are also Hebrew and Jewish studies as subjects, as well as morning prayers and the various festivals or chagim. That also means that one has to absorb the meaning of some Hebrew and Yiddish words that tend to be part of the Herzlia vernacular. With Jim's linguistic ability, this was easily accomplished. Most teachers adapt fairly quickly, and Jim Goodacre was definitely one of them. In fact, he made it a point to learn and absorb the Jewish culture as quickly as possible. As a case in point, in the early days of his principalship, he went to Kerem pre-primary school to give a talk to prospective parents who didn't yet know him and who thought that his name was Mr. Goodacre. While a number of the Jewish festivals are of a more conservative nature, that cannot be said about the festival of Purim, where everything is turned on its head at Herzlia. Besides the children arriving in fancy dress, that's for the school day, of course, it's not an extramural, and shouting and waving rattles at appropriate moments during the Megillah reading in the book of Esther, the staff at Herzlia Constantia during Jim's time would also dress up and perform silly plays and sing silly songs that they had spent hours in their own time rehearsing. And the proper English gentleman that Jim was seamlessly metamorphosized into one of the silly educators at Herzlia Constantia, who made the children laugh and allowed them to enjoy the teachers making fun of themselves. And of course, who could forget the Womble? Jim Goodacre based this creature on the British TV series, The Wombles of Wimbledon. Every week, Mr. Goodacre would pop in unexpectedly into all the classrooms to rate the neatness of each classroom on a scale of 1 to 10. The children scrambled to pick up tissues and pencils and anything else lying on the floor, but alas, often too late. At the end of each weekly Friday assembly, the Womble was handed to the class that had scored the highest that week. The competition was fierce, and what most would consider a chore was turned into a fun experience. And there was also the Woozledum, which I believe was Jim's own creation. It was a strange creature that usually hid in trees in the Tokai plantation. And that was the prize of the eagle-eyed children who were completing the big walk each year to raise money for charity. His creativity knew no bounds, and those who are here will certainly remember the Fiddling for a Roof plays that he adapted and wrote, as well as his adaptation of Pinocchio. The former involved parents, teachers, and children, while the latter was primarily for children. Not only was it an outlet for those who were part of Herzlia Constantia, but also a phenomenal bonding experience for all concerned. Jim could, as Peter has mentioned, with ease write plays, songs, and rhyming couplets, just to name a few, and all of this done with a very light touch. And as also mentioned, he has been memorialized for writing the school song for Weinberg Boys' Schools, which has been in use for over 40 years and will no doubt continue to live on for many more years. I think every staff member who worked at Herzlia Constantia when Jim Goodacre was principal immediately recognized that he was an outstanding educator and that we had a lot to learn from him. I don't think I am exaggerating when I say that he was more than 30 years ahead of his time in his understanding of primary school children and how they learn. His co-authored series of comprehensive English practice textbooks was, until recently, being still used in a number of schools and is based on an integrated thematic approach of learning language. The importance of context in language usage was emphasized on a daily basis in all classrooms at Herzlia Constantia when he introduced the word of the day, one word a day that had to be learned for purposes of spelling as well as meaning, and generally based on the topics that were being explored in each year grade. I want to emphasize there were no long lists of words that had to be learned, but just one word a day that was meaningful to the children. And I'm quite sure that these are words that the children, who are now parents of their own, have not forgotten. During the late 1980s, I became fascinated by computers and did a number of courses in that field. and then persuaded Jim to help me with introducing them into the school. He was not keen at first, but when I gave him valid educational reasons about how it would enhance the children's educational experience, he came out in full support, and as a result, one of the first educational computer networks at schools in the Western Cape was born. And as an unintended consequence, he himself became an early adherent of technology, so much so that he too bought a computer for himself and started typing the comprehensive English practice modules on the word processor instead of writing these out by hand to be typed. The valedictory service for the outgoing senior students who were moving on to the middle school was a very big event on the school calendar at the end of each year. About a month in advance, he would send a letter to the parents of these students to request photos of their children's younger years, as toddlers, babies, or any other stage of their previous years. The more embarrassing and the funnier they were, the better. The parents were sworn to secrecy and had to smuggle these photos in envelopes to the school secretary. Jim took them home and spent a phenomenal number of hours over many weeks doctoring these photos with his amusing cartoon bubble commentaries coming out of the children's mouths, a lot of which were hilariously taken out of context. Until he was able to use technology and PowerPoint for this, he used a camera and a video to collate these into a movie that had everyone in the audience, adults and children alike, rolling around in laughter. There is no doubt that he had an extraordinary gift to entertain through the lens of the more humorous side of life. On a lighter note, Jim encouraged children to play with kites, with marbles, and also with games such as hopscotch. Although occasionally this would backfire on him when he had a group of boys crying outside his office and telling him that other boys had stolen their marbles. But in his inimitable way, he always sorted these little problems out to the satisfaction of all concerned. Towards the end of his principalship, Jim Goodacre would occasionally leave the school at lunchtime, and he would tell the secretary to tell anyone who wanted to speak to him that he was on a handicapped course. Well, he wasn't lying, it was the golf course. However, he worked very long hours both at school and at home, and he had the blessing of the Herzlia management to take off a few hours every now and then to relax. And he shared his love of golf with the pupils when he would sometimes go out at lunchtime to hit his 7-iron down the field and get the children to collect the golf balls. So he may well have educated the children in a different manner and paved the way for them to take up the sport when they became adults. To conclude, Jim Goodacre was a mentor not only to me, but to all the teachers who had the privilege of being at Herzlia Constantia during his time, and many of them are here in this room, as he was the most progressive educator that we have come across. He had not only encouraged creativity in the children, but also in the teachers, and we all became better educators because of him. He was a principal par excellence, and he was greatly respected by the parents and loved by the children of the school. He undoubtedly enriched all our lives immeasurably. In short, he was a very special person and a true mensch, and we are all grateful to have had him in our lives, and I know that our memories of him will continue to live on. Herzlia Constantia was an incredibly happy school and was indeed in the golden years when he was there. On behalf of the former teachers and children and their families, I extend my heartfelt condolences to his wife Irene and to his children, Peter, Merrill, Julia, and Elizabeth, and to all his grandchildren and great-grandchildren. And I thank you for sharing this wonderful person with us.
Well, good afternoon again, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Tony Stewart, and I am a teacher at Weinberg Boys Junior School, and I have been asked to deliver a tribute to Mr. Jim Goodacre on behalf of Weinberg Boys Junior School. When my headmaster asked me on Monday to do this, I was honoured, and I think it is in some way quite appropriate, because I myself was a pupil of Weinberg Boys Junior School under the deputy headmastership of Mr. Jim Goodacre. I started at Weinberg Boys Junior School in 1969 and left in 1975. And yeah, so, and then of course I've now been a teacher at Weinberg Boys Junior School for 38 years. So I'm really honored to deliver a tribute on behalf of Weinberg Boys Junior School. It's so good to see Mr. Clive Alexander in the audience today. I wasn't expecting to see him here today. Mr. Alexander joined Weinberg Boys Junior School in 1976, he tells me this afternoon, and therefore was a colleague of Mr. Goodacre's. And he told me that before the proceedings began that he felt compelled to come today simply because of the way in which Mr. Goodacre welcomed him when he arrived as a new teacher at the school. So it's really good to see you here, Clive. Mr. Goodacre was appointed as the vice principal of Weinberg Boys Junior School in the early 1970s. I have with me today the official school magazine of the Weinberg Boys Junior and High School of 1972. And I would just like to read a short excerpt from the section that deals with the junior school staffing of 1972. So principal, Mr. Jan Oosthuizen, and it reads as follows: during the second term, our new vice principal, Mr. J. Goodacre, joined us, and he has thrown himself enthusiastically into the school life and the administration of cricket. When we have refreshments afterwards, I'll leave this on the counter if you'd like to look at a number of photos of Mr. Goodacre with his cricket team and with the prefects and so on. Jim Goodacre immersed himself in the life of the school with involvement in societies, sport, especially cricket. Coaching the under-13A team. He was a legendary cricket coach with his trademark floppy hat and his shooting stick. He was involved in music, and he loved theatre, as we've heard this afternoon. Together with Mr. Forbes Smith, who later became the deputy of Weinberg Boys Junior himself, Jim was responsible for wonderful performances of, amongst others, Oliver Twist, Treasure Island, with, I'm told, virtually his entire family, his wife and his children on stage. Mr. Chris Merrington told me in a phone call last night that he himself, as a Weinberg Junior boy, had a part in one of Jim's productions which necessitated Chris dancing with Elizabeth Goodacre. But above all, he was a passionate and innovative teacher in the classroom. He taught English, and we've heard from both Peter and from Shirley regarding the CEP Comprehensive English Practice textbook that he co-wrote. And Shirley, I need to just correct something that you said. When you said it used to be used in schools, I'm a grade 7 English teacher at Weinberg Boys Junior School, amongst other subjects, and I must tell you that unapologetically we still use it. It's no longer in print, so we aren't able to get sufficient copies for everyone, but we do use it as a resource, despite the immense number of resources that are available via the internet and artificial intelligence, etc. We often go back to the CEP. So it's really something remarkable that he achieved in co-writing that. An example of Mr. Goodacre's innovation is him bringing a video recorder into the classroom. Now, you must understand that this was around about 1974, when even television had not yet become a part of everyday life in South Africa. I remember as a standard 5 boy in 1975, our family getting our first television set. So this was pre that. And Mr. Goodacre arrived in the classroom with a video camera and proceeded to teach the boys how to use it, and used it as a teaching aid. Just one of the ways in which he was so innovative in his teaching methods. If I may read some wonderful comments from Weinberg Boys Junior School Old Boys on the social media, on social media, which was in response to the In Memoriam, which was shared on Sunday by Mr. Chris Merrington. This one's from Ian Melia. Jim Goodacre was a Weinberg Junior School legend. I started at Weinberg Junior in 1973 in Standard 5. I played in the Weinberg Boys Junior School Under 13 cricket team. Jim Goodacre was the coach. Great memories. Jan and Jim, a great team as junior school head and deputy. And then Hugh Hurst, 1976. He, referring to Mr. Goodacre, told us in class that his daughters were not looking after their budgies, Bubble and Squeak. He asked us to produce a letter from our parents if we would like to adopt the budgies. As I wasn't allowed a dog as a boy, Mum wrote a letter and I was chosen to be the new custodian of the birds. He duly turned up with them in their cage at our house just off Kendall Road that evening. I think they were about 10 years old at the time. Bubble died when I was in matric, and Squeak went on until I was back in the UK studying to be a chiropractor. When I spoke to Jim Goodacre at the 2016 Old Boys Union dinner in the school hall, the first thing he did was to inquire about the budgies. At that point, they would have been about 50 if they were still alive. I was able to report that they had lived to a ripe old age. I remember he was an outstanding cartoonist and would always draw a character I think he called Fred on the blackboard to get the point across when he was teaching us. I don't even think it was 2 years ago when he contacted me on Facebook and had noticed I lived in Clevedon in North Somerset. He did his military service at RAF Locking, less than 15 miles from where I live, where I think he told me he met and courted his wife-to-be. He was one of those masters who was devoted to his vocation and undoubtedly changed many of our lives for the better. He pointed out a grammatical error on my website when he contacted me on Facebook. May his soul rest in peace and rise in glory. Howard Taylor, fond memories and passionate about teaching in the class and on the cricket field. Brett Erasmus, deepest condolences to everyone who knew and loved Mr. Goodacre. I remember him as a Standard 2, which is now a Grade 4 boy, and there was a degree of fear. He was a fair man and a brilliant teacher. Rest well. From a personal point of view, I can attest to the degree of fear. I received a hiding from Jim Goodacre in my primary school years, and Clive Alexander and I were just sharing earlier before that he had this small little office down the one corridor, and amazing how certain memories stick with one, but I do remember that. In addition to the memories that Jim Goodacre left us, there's a very tangible legacy that lives on in the form of the school song, which is sung regularly at Weinberg Boys Junior School and Weinberg Boys High School, and which in fact you heard earlier this afternoon. In the early 1980s, Mr. Desmond Vihan, who was a Weinberg Boys Junior School music teacher, presented to Jim Goodacre a music score and asked whether he would be prepared to add the lyrics of what would then become the school song to that. Of course, he did so, and for the last 41 years, this song has been sung weekly at both Weinberg Boys Junior School and Weinberg Boys High School. And it has been a massively unifying force within both schools, with lines such as brothers in an endless chain. For me, every time I sing words of the school song, such as we join now with those before us, Supera Moras makes us one, I will remember the legendary educator who penned these words. Thank you very much.
Is that fine? Okay. Whew. Okay. Good afternoon. Thank you all for being here today to celebrate and remember the extraordinary life of a truly remarkable man. A husband, father, grandfather, great-grandfather, teacher, and friend. My grandpa, or Pa as we called him, lived a full and rich life, not just in years, but in love, creativity, and wisdom. He was first and foremost a loving husband to our wonderful granny, Irene. Their partnership was a source of strength and inspiration, steady, supportive, and full of quiet grace. Together, they raised 4 children, and through them, the generations that followed have been blessed with his love and endless stories. Thank you for modeling such a beautiful, loving marriage to us. As a teacher and headmaster, Pa was a passionate educator. He believed in the power of learning and didn't just teach in the classroom. He authored English grammar books, gave lectures, and wrote poems, plays, and songs for school theatrical productions. He is also pretty much the reason Amy, Justin, and I passed English. His teaching even went slightly beyond English and into maths. I'm not sure how this began, but every time I would say goodbye to him, he would ask me what the square root of 64 was. Then, of course, there were Susie and Fred, his beloved cartoon characters, which were used in birthday cards, his textbooks, on classroom blackboards, teaching lessons, and even my mom and dad's wedding invitation. Every child, grandchild, and great-grandchild received a hand-drawn card, lovingly illustrated, completely unique, and always tailored to what we loved most at the time. Whether it was dancing, a love of animals, mountain biking, or bugs, Pa saw us. And through Susie and Fred, he let us know how much he loved and celebrated who we were. My mom has kept every single one of those cards because they weren't just drawings and rhymes. They were moments of love, snapshots of time, and gifts from a grandfather who never stopped being curious about who we were becoming. Above all else, Pa gave us his time. He listened, he encouraged, he taught. Sorry. He was gentle, wise, endlessly creative, and deeply kind. Pa, if I'd known it was going to be the last time I hugged you, I would have held on for longer and squeezed you harder. Sorry. I would have asked 101 more questions about your life. I know Amy would have made you a chocolate coffee cheesecake. And Justin would have asked you for a fishing story. And maybe, to be honest, we all needed one more grammar lesson. It's hard to comprehend that you are no longer with us. Sorry. But when I look out of the window and see the wind brush through the trees and hear the birds chirp and sing, I know that you are in fact there, with us through everything we do. Losing Pa was really hard. It's hard because his presence was so constant, his love so steady, and his influence so profound. But we find comfort in the legacy he leaves behind, not just in the poems or the pictures, the plays or the lessons, but in us, in how we love our families, in how we tell our stories, and in how we make people feel. There are a million more things I could say and stories I could tell, but I'll end with what he gave us. His humor, his curiosity, his passion for learning, and above all, his love. And for all time's sake, what is the square root of 64? Thank you.
If there's anybody else who'd like to say a few words, the microphone is here for you. Otherwise, there are refreshments at the back of the hall, tea and coffee and some snacks, and we'd like you to join us in taking the plastic off and, and enjoying that for the rest of the afternoon. Thank you very much once again for coming, and I say the weather didn't really play ball for us, but we really appreciate you being here and all the people who are logged on online. Thank you very much.